Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the first dMSA seminar this year. This one is entitled The Transnational Aspect of Balkan Memories within Turmoils in Ukraine and Palestine. My name is Agata Domachowska, and I am Associate Professor at the Faculty of Humanities, Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń, Poland. I also serve as the head of the Laboratory for the Study of Collective Memory in Post-Communist Europe, Postcomer, also at the University at Nicolaus Copernicus University. I'm very happy to be your host today and to moderate this seminar with an amazing panelist, Monika Bobako, who is an associate professor at the Adam Mickiewicz University, Poznań, Poland. Thank you so much for joining us today, Monika.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. We've got also Arvan Mehmeti, who is a PhD candidate in the South Slavic Languages and Cultural Studies at the Humboldt University in Berlin.
Thank you, Agata.
And last but not least, Francesco Trupia. He's an adjunct researcher at the University Center for Excellence, Interacting Minds, Environments and Societies at the Nicolaus Copernicus University, Toruń, Poland.
Thank you, Agata. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. And today we would like to discuss how the reverberation of the current wars in both in Ukraine and Palestine influence the Balkan memory space in the context of people's long-lasting traumas of the violent past. Since the Balkans continue to be the arena of interstate dispute and, of course, unfinished nation buildings processes, this panel would explore the nexus of memory and traumas in the context of current East and West relations, as well as the influence that transnational cultures and political aspiration have had in the Southeast Europe. But before we start our seminar, please let me just briefly share with you some technical information. To avoid disruption during the speaker's presentation, audience microphones and cameras will remain disabled until the Q&A session. At the time, the audience will be allowed to unmute and activate the cameras, and also pay attention that the chat feature will be disabled, but both the audience and speakers can submit questions and, of course, comments via the Q&A chat. So everyone from the audience can signal the desire to ask a question by using the raise hand feature in our application Teams. Of course, I'll be monitoring the Q&A chat during this time. So I think that without further ado, let's just start our today seminar. And firstly, I would like to give a floor to our first guest, Professor Monika Bobako. I just wanted to add that her areas of specialization include political anthropology, critical race theory, post-colonial theory, and religious studies, with a special focus on Islam and as well as gender. And today she will tell us more about the European memory wars and the question of Palestine. So, Monika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you for invitation to this interesting panel. Perhaps before I start, I have to make this reservation about my participation in this particular discussion, because my specialization is not the Balkans. Yeah, I'm interested in the issue that is the topic of today's panel in more general terms, in the sense of how memory issues and difficult past in our societies is somehow linked with reactions and attitudes towards the conflicts that we are interested in this discussion. The war in Ukraine and Israel-Palestine war, or the war in Gaza, or genocide in Gaza. How is it related to internal debates? So I'm more familiar with the Polish context. However, I see some particular patterns of how the debate develops, what kind of issues are involved, which perhaps are more general and perhaps could be related to the context that you are specialist in, like the Balkans. So I assume that my participation here is more to give a reference point and draw these transnational mechanisms that operate in different contexts. So that's what I want to say. I will not be talking about the Balkans. I will be talking about particular mechanisms, and especially in connection to Poland. I'm deeply convinced that those attitudes, debates, reactions to the conflicts in questions, Ukraine and Gaza, are not just debates about these particular wars, these particular conflicts, these particular forms of violence that are happening outside of our societies, but they've got their counterparts. They inspire some particular debates and confrontations in our societies, and the stakes are more general. First of all, the stakes are how we understand Europeanness and the belonging of our societies to the West. And that's clearly visible in discussions about war in Ukraine, what kind of interpretation of the war, who is the aggressor, who is the victim of the aggression. All those kind of approaches clearly are related to the vision of Europe, of the West, our place in that. And that's one thing. Another issue, obviously, is Gaza. And I am particularly interested in Israel-Palestine context in connection with the ongoing memory wars in Poland. And also, I believe that in those memory wars, the stakes are more general, not just related to this particular conflict, and not related to just a particular interpretation of, I don't know, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, which is also important. So my first observation regarding the way we should connect the Palestine-Israel context with our memoryscape, so to say, and with our debates, is somehow linked to an ideas developed in two particular works. And I suppose that everyone who is familiar with the debates on the memory and trauma also knows two important books that seem to be very relevant to this particular discussion. And one of the books is entitled The Holocaust and the Nakba, a New Grammar of Trauma and History. And that is a collected volume edited by Bashir Bashir and Amos Goldberg, two Israeli historians, one of them of Palestinian origins, another one Jewish. And I consider this book a really path-breaking approach to memory and trauma. And somehow this book corresponds to another well-known work in the area of memory studies, which is the book by Michael Rothberg, Multi-Dimensional Memory. I suppose that many people are familiar with two works, and I think, obviously, they are not focusing on the Polish context, but I believe that to really grasp this connection between the realities of violence in Israel-Palestine and Polish memory struggles, we have to try to look at this kind of conceptualizations that I find in these particular books, and ask questions. What does it mean in our context? And in both of those works, what I find is a particular understanding of the connection between the conflict and violence, ongoing violence, and memory. In the way, obviously, in this book, The Holocaust and the Nakba, authors try to grasp within one framework the whole discussion of the Holocaust memory as it is operating in Israel and also in a wider context, and a separate area of the debates on Nakba, on the experiences of the Palestinians. And one of the observations they have, and also Michael Rothberg, is that there are like two paradigms, two contradictory narratives that concern the history, the past, and the memory that are somehow in clash, in conflict. And one of those paradigms is what they call the Holocaust narrative. And that's the narrative somehow developed in the course of this European debate on anti-Semitism after the Second World War, and this very difficult reckoning with anti-Semitic past in, like, if you look at Poland, in the Polish context, and all those complicated issues related to the fact that the Holocaust happened on the Polish territory and it affected Polish Jews at the same time. It happened in the society, in the context in which we had a long history of Polish anti-Semitism. So many things have been happening in Poland regarding the accounting for the history of Holocaust and accounting for the history of Polish anti-Semitism. In a wider European context, we can say that after the Second World War, the Holocaust narrative gradually became one of the building blocks of construction of Europeanness, in the sense that if you look at, not directly after the Second World War, but the 90s and later, commemoration of the Holocaust became a very important element of public life in Europe. It became a very element of like ritual of celebrating post Second World War Europeanness and those connections between European nations, etc., etc. That is a set of phenomena that Enzo Traverso calls a civic religion, in the sense that reference to the Holocaust, commemoration of the Holocaust, became a very important part of European construction, identity construction. Obviously, it worked differently in different countries. Germany is a special case. Poland is a separate case. I'm very curious how this particular element operates in Balkans. I mean, is it an important reference point or not? And how is it related to the experiences of a later war history in the Balkans? So I'd be absolutely interested in what you say about this particular moment. So we've got this Holocaust narrative as an important building block of Europeanness, and some particular reworking on the Holocaust issues in the Polish context, which are related with recent uncovering history of Polish anti-Semitism, at the same time with a very strong opposition against that, politically motivated, institutionalized, etc., etc. So we've got like a memory war in Poland around the Holocaust, around the issue of Polish complicity in the Holocaust. That's one thing. Another narrative that I mentioned that you can find in those books, in those two books, The Holocaust and the Nakba, one book and the multidimensional memory by Michael Rothberg, is the idea that this separate narrative, that narrative that is in clash, is a post-colonial or anti-colonial narrative. The narrative that is focusing on the issue of European colonization, on the issue of European attitudes and relations with non-European others. Obviously, in the view of those authors, the attitudes towards Palestinians, towards Arabs, are very strongly related to this particular sphere of problems. And if we look at wider European context, we see that this particular clash of narratives is clearly visible, I don't know, in Germany, whenever we have this discourse around the Holocaust, the discourse around Gaza, Israel-Palestine issues, and this emphasis on opposing anti-Semitism is very often related to some forms of marginalizing, silencing, um, um, who talk about Palestinian experiences. Those who try to emphasize the colonial European past, also in German context, and how this colonial past is related with the ongoing conflict Israel-Palestine. So, but this particular narrative obviously works in a very special way in Polish context, because Poland was not a colonial country in the sense of having overseas colonies. Obviously, we had some of colonialism by proxy. We absorbed a lot of Eurocentric elements of imperial colonial societies, etc., etc. But this lack of colonial history means that colonial or anti-colonial critique is very weak developed. I mean, developed in a very weak way, hardly present in our public debates. How is it linked to our memory wars? I'm just claiming in my recent analysis on the topic of memory and trauma, that in Polish context, in Polish public debate, due to particular to this memory struggle over the Holocaust, over Polish anti-Semitism, over Polish complicity in the Holocaust, etc., etc., and the lack of this post-colonial or anti-colonial criticism related to some critical revision of all kinds of racism, people, particular situation. But we can say that in Poland there is no discursive space to articulate towards to articulate Palestinian voice. And obviously, for recent months, as Gaza, the situation has been changing. There is debates, ideas appearing, especially recently, were changing the terms of the debate. But the starting point that I observed very early on, in our public debate, we have been so preoccupied with memory over the issues of the Holocaust. It has been very difficult to articulate pro-Palestinian position without accusing somehow anti-Semitic or few wanted development of anti-Semitism. So for me, it was very interesting to observe that this space, discursive space for relating to what have been genocide, like coming towards to justify the use of this term. You know? So it's this Polish issues that are somehow blocking direct relations to the Palestinian suffering. Somehow, what is really where people can
sorry, Monica, can you hear me? Because I have some problems with the connection and I cannot hear Monica clearly.
I think Monica unfortunately freezed for now. Hopefully she will. Monica, can you hear us? Because you freeze for a second.
I can hear. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah. But we have some unstable connection a little bit. So.
Oh, okay. So just to conclude, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to say that it's one conflict, one war is happening there, and somehow it activates particular confrontation type of memory wars in our particular context, and somehow the way we can see the developments in the Middle East is very strongly defined by our past, by the experience of violence, and by the on this particular past. And I see the situation changing, and somehow that the evolving attitudes towards Palestine, to Palestine and Israel situation, the war in Gaza, are somehow connected with the evolving understanding of our own past, of the role memory of our past should play. So I'm just curious how particular connections, I mean, to what extent of what I observe in Polish context is the extend this history of the Holocaust, this particular Second World War, are playing a role in the area in which you are interested in. Is it an issue just in the war of the 90s dominating the picture? And also another is how the debate had been has been evolving in recent months as those conflicts that we are interested in also developed. Yeah, and the connections between those debates and the construction of Westernness and those relations with the East or the global South. So basically, of what I said, I'd love to somehow get into discussion with your observation. To what extent those patterns are more general and operating in different contexts. So perhaps I will start with that, and then we'll look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you for the great theoretical introduction to our discussion. I guess we will have time, of course, to discuss at least part of the questions you formulate, and thank you so much for bringing up the Polish context, at least briefly, to our discussion. So let's right now move on to the Western Balkans, and I would like to give the floor to Arvan Mehmeti. He is currently working on his dissertation on the cultural peace process between Kosovo and Serbia. And he has been conducted research on peace and conflicts, and he has many years of experience in the fields of cultural diplomacy and disinformation. Today, he will tell us more about the Western Balkans memory culture, fragmentation, and unlearned lessons. So thank you once again, Arvan, for being today with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agata. I will try to share my screen with you all now. All right. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Can you just confirm briefly? Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to speak about the Western Balkans memory culture and not only the fragmentation and the unlearned lessons, but especially the challenging times in this post-war period in Kosovo, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and how especially cultural actors and NGOs are trying to challenge those official or kind of official memory cultures in those countries. I will move, I hope I can switch from one slide to another. Otherwise, yes, I can. So as I was saying, in a second part, my work or this work will focus on these artistic efforts, especially the theater plays from Western Balkans that challenge the official memory culture in those countries, a memory culture that focuses on the strong man, on the warlords, on the heroes of the wars in the Western Balkans. And also questions how these wars are memorized in the world. I will make just a slight hint here of what Habermas stated a couple of years ago when we had these new developments in the war of Ukraine in 2022, when he said that this is the first war in Europe after the Second World War. And I remember I was in Berlin among students and fellow researchers from the Western Balkans. And what we did, we tried to come up with movies that are dealing with the war in the Western Balkans and to showcase them in Berlin and to somehow initiate a debate. A final point of this presentation should be to consider how all these points that I will talk about now can give some kind of lessons, and if they are applicable to the situations in Ukraine and in Palestine. I will wait a bit for the slides to move because it takes a bit more time. Oh, yeah. So, as you can see, I've deliberately chosen this image for me on my right side. It shows the radio television of Pristina, which is the public broadcaster for all of you that have been or not been in Kosovo, in Pristina. And above it, you can see something written only in Albanian letters, and that is Liria ka emër. It means that freedom has a name. Now, this is a very recent, let's say, poster or event that has happened in the last 2, 3, 4 years in Kosovo, where this slogan has appeared. It is the reason for it is to basically claim that the freedom and the post-war period that everyone enjoys in Kosovo is due to these people that I call in my presentation the strong man, the man of war, the warlords, the man of the liberation army. And even public buildings such as the public broadcaster, which stands very firmly in the center of Pristina, becomes as a kind of a holding and is being used for these slogans. As I mentioned here, public institutions are making steps backwards in Kosovo in the last few years. They are excluding other perspectives of the war, the recent war in Kosovo, and they decide to deliberately represent the recent past in a way which suits them. Most of the institutional symbols and cultural institutions and educational institutions in Kosovo have failed to address the recent past, in my opinion, and they rather decide to remain stuck in a distant and what I call a comfortable past. For all of you that are familiar with the subjects and the historiography in the region, the comfortable past is the past of the medieval ages and maybe until the 19th century. but not to deal with the 20th or the 21st century. Such institutions, as I named them, are the University of Pristina, the Academy of Science of Kosovo, the Institute of Albanian Studies, and as well as the public broadcaster. They emphasize and focus on the glorification of individuals from the war, why they deliberately neglect the memory and the memorialization of civil victims, of missing persons, but especially also of people and activists of peace on all the sides in Kosovo. The dominant narratives in history textbooks, as showcased by NGOs who deal with textbooks in Kosovo for the last 25 years, but also in public spaces, glorify the memory of war heroes and strong men. There is hardly any statue or any kind of memorializing women, the role of women during the conflict in the 90s or during the war in Kosovo. I don't know if that is any different in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I fear it is somehow similar to Kosovo. Kosovo taxpayers-funded institutions such as the public broadcaster, but also the Institute of History, which is kind of semi-independent from the University of Pristina, are supporting these post-war political elites, and they promote these strongman narratives. Let's move to the next slide. Okay. Now, the next image that I've selected for this presentation depicts graffiti where you can see the Bosnian, this is in the Bosnian-Serbian entity part in the city of Banja Luka, and it depicts Ratko Mladic, a war criminal. And beneath it, you can see, I think, a sign that unfortunately has become familiar with all of us due to the war in Ukraine. This was depicted by university professor Armina Galias in 2022. And here I've chosen this on purpose because I'm dealing with this dismissal of identities of the others. Now I've looked at both narratives, and both narratives are the narratives coming from Serbia, but also from Serbian, Bosnian-Serbian entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Russia, and compared them. And in these both narratives, the statehood and the national identity of the neighboring countries are dismissed as so-called artificial constructs. In the 1990s, Serbian political leaders argued that Bosnia and Herzegovina could not be recognized within the borders drawn by Josip Broz Tito. One of the persons who was kind of an ideological leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Šešelj, in his academic work, even because he was working in the university in Bosnia and Herzegovina before the wars, he claimed that the borders of Yugoslavia and Serbia should be redrawn, and in those borders you could not see Bosnia and Herzegovina as an independent or as a equal entity, so to say. Additionally, there are claims that a genocide against Serbs was occurring in that area. And this somehow mirrors, in my point of view, Putin's 2022 narratives that Ukrainians were once considered Russians, and those who identified as such were threatened with genocide. Similarly to this, Putin asserts that the communist leader, and by that he means Lenin, arbitrarily drew Ukraine's borders. And this again is kind of close to this Serbian nationalist narratives who depict Tito as the creator of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I've further looked into Russia's involvement into Western Balkans, not only because I'm dealing with this post-war reconciliation process in the Western Balkans, focusing on Kosovo and Serbia, but because I was part of a project in Germany and a study which I headed and unfortunately is not being published publicly, and it deals with disinformation campaigns in the Western Balkans. Russia, in this study where me and my team looked at social media, which I mentioned here, and media outlets on Facebook, Instagram, and various websites, is very much active and has a kind of revisionist agenda on the Western Balkans. It especially focuses on denying the 1995 Srebrenica genocide, and also tries to dismiss the rulings made by the international courts on Srebrenica. As we've looked at that study, more than 500,000 of followers are actually actively following those pro-Kremlin media outlets. Now, I'd like to go on and focus now on the second part of my presentation, and that is how cultural institutions in the Western Balkans, be it in Kosovo or in Bosnia and Herzegovina, are trying to challenge those official memory cultures, but also are questioning the way in which the Western world memorizes the conflicts and the wars, and also the war crimes in the Western Balkans. I put in parentheses the Handke project. This is a theater play by the Kosovo theater company of Jetoneziraj in Pristina, with theater company comprised of actors from all the Western Balkans. And the aim of Handke project, which was shown recently also in Paris, I will speak about it in my next slide, was to showcase how Handke, Peter Handke, should be familiar for most of us, is an Austrian writer who in 1997 wrote a book which is seen as very pro-Serbian and entitled A Journey to the Rivers, Justice for Serbia. Handke, as depicted in one of the pictures that I'm showing here, attended the funeral of Milosevic and held, among others, also a speech, and said, among other things, that I don't know the truth, but I look, I listen, I feel, and I remember. And this is why I'm here today, close to Yugoslavia, close to Serbia, and close to Slobodan Milosevic. Now, as we know, Peter Handke is the recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature, and there was an outrage not only by the Association of victims and of the mothers in Srebrenica and in Kosovo, but also everywhere else in the world, writing and pleading to the Nobel Prize Committee to not go along with that. Peter Handke received the prize, and in his address, he did not even speak about what he did in the 90s and what his position, his problematic position on Srebrenica, on the Bosnian Wars, on Yugoslavia and Milosevic was. So now you can see a scene from this Handke project, which I was able to visit this year in Prague, in Czech Republic. This theater performance went also to Bitev Theater, and I mentioned it in one of my points. Bitev Theater is one of the active cultural institutions in Serbia, in Belgrade. It was also shown in Paris lately, but it has never been invited to Austria, which speaks volumes. It means that the Austrian cultural institutions are not even able to engage with this problematic figure, even years after all of this, even after the international court rulings and dozens of studies and reports on the Srebrenica genocide. But in 2024, just recently in November, the theater play was staged in Paris, and all of a sudden the Parisian theater was threatened by the lawyers of Peter Handke. And what dMSAJanuary2025, as you can see with this actor here, does in the end of this theater play is to read out the letters to the public that the lawyer of Peter Handke sends to the Parisian theater, and how he threatened them that basically what this theater play is claiming is not only not true, but it is false, and therefore this should not be staged. This is my last slide. So I think going back to my very first slide, where I basically spoke about the structure of my presentation, the aim of this presentation is to give hints and impulses of how this fragmented and very difficult memory culture in the Western Balkans. Here I focus on Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but you could say the same about Serbia, how this has given a void in the memory culture of these countries and this region. And with a void, you get this necessity and you get the chance to fill it. And who uses the chance when public institutions fail? It's basically political elites in the region. And political elites abused not only public spaces with the statues that they have raised of war heroes and so-called war heroes. I think just recently in Sarajevo, there was a tank that was put up in Sarajevo in front of a school trying to glorify war heroes and the war. It got a lot of protest from local citizens, but it is there. And then I think the second point was to point out to cultural institutions such as this theater production of dMSAJanuary2025 and others around the region, who are trying to challenge these very fragmented ways of memorizing the wars, the conflicts, by coming out with alternative narratives, not only about civil victims and missing persons, which is still a huge problem in the Western Balkans, but also by challenging the way that cultural institutions, such as the Nobel Prize Committee or the theater landscape in Austria, in France, wherever in Europe, is dealing with the very recent past of the Western Balkans. And I think here I'd like to finish this part of my presentation and yield my time to my colleagues by saying that there are many lessons to be learned by the lessons that we have not learned, unfortunately, in the Western Balkans for Ukraine and for Palestine. And maybe we can discuss about that in the Q&A part of this event today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Urban, and thank you for this Western Balkans, Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina perspective. And right now we will be moving from the Western Balkans more to the east part of Balkan Peninsula, to Bulgaria. So the last but not least, Francesco Trupia and his presentation titled From Silence to Oblivion, Bulgaria's Communist Heritage Amidst the Russian War Against Ukraine. I would like to also to add that Francesco research interests range from identity and memory politics to minority ontologies and histories, encompassing issues of democratization and borderization in Southeast Europe and Caucasus. So, Francesco, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Agata, for this introduction. So I will skip this part in introducing myself and my work. Before sharing with you my presentation, as you said, Agata is going to touch upon the issues of reverberation of the Russian war against Ukraine in Bulgaria, which is usually a country that not many scholars focus on, especially when it comes to going outside the Balkan region and comparing Bulgaria with other regional contexts such as Ukraine or the Middle East, broadly speaking. I have to say that I agree with Monica Bobako when she says that the two current wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East and Gaza in particular are not just a matter for the regions where these two wars are happening and taking place, but also for other countries debating the issues of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, decolonization, anti-imperialism positions. And I think that the Western Balkans have been the place where the reverberation of these two wars since 2022 up now have been really at the center of discussions. I can say that, for instance, I was very interested in knowing how, for instance, that in Kosovo, there was this kind of conversation among historians on how the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, could mirror some of the techniques of Hamas, and the discussion that sparked. I think Arban can say something more in the Q&A session. But I also agree with when Monica Bobako is framing the Second World War memories and the Holocaust as a way of Europeanizing our memory landscape and our discourse. And I think in the Balkans has always been this kind of case, especially in some countries right now. For instance, in the midst of the war in Gaza, we know how Serbian political elites are very close to Israel and justifying the right of self-defense of Israel against the terrorism, and also using history, the Second World War history, to justify this kind of positioning in the Middle East, which of course is hiding lots of Islamophobia and issues that the Serbian civil society and the Serbian political elites have not come to terms with, from the Srebrenica genocide, with the genocide itself and the war of Milosevic. We know that since Aleksandar Vučić has taken power in Belgrade, history has been used and misused to justify certain position of Serbia and so on and so forth. But also in Bulgaria, the Holocaust memory has become a myth, the myth of Bulgarians helping Jews during the Second World War, which was partially true, because let's say that the history of the Holocaust in Bulgaria is much more complicated, and it deals with the complicity of the Bulgarian political elites during the Second World War on the extermination of Jews from Thessaloniki and from the today's North Macedonian territories, which were back then occupied by Bulgarian forces. So definitely, Monica Bobako is right in saying that these two wars are really triggering some interesting discussions in the Western Balkans, as Arban pointed out, but also in Bulgaria. And now I move to my presentation. And let's see if I'm able to share my screen. I don't know if you're able to see the presentation. Agata, can you give me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Before starting with this presentation of Bulgaria, I have to say that this is, I'm going to give you like a qualitative insight from a very small case project that I did together with Vesel Alexiev, who is a Sofia-based architect and a urbanist, regarding one of the most debated monuments in Sofia. You see here from the first slide a part of this monument. For those who have been in Sofia, I think it's almost impossible to not see the monument, or what it was, the monument of the Soviet army in the central part of Sofia, very nearby the parliament and the cathedral. And it was all the time sparking contestation and political debates in the country, especially after the Russia attacked Ukraine, not only in 2022, but I have to say in 2014. And this is like a project that we are together with Veselin Alexiev, we are going to publish in a book that I'm working with Professor Jasna Dragovic-Soso. And we are preparing this collected volume where we are looking exactly at these memory politics in a time of transition between these two wars, the the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine. And to begin with this monument, I think for those who haven't been in Sofia, this is actually this was the monument, because the monument was dismantled, at least the central part of the monument, in December 2023. And when we started to look at this monument after Russia, let's say, escalated the war in Ukraine in 2022, we focus exactly on this monument in order to have a look at how Bulgaria was positioning itself in between the Euro-Atlantic institutions, which Bulgaria is part of, and the history of Bulgaria, which has lots of connotations and common places with the history of Russia and the Russian imperialism in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Balkans as well. And the monument that I'm showing to you right now, you can see, I hope you can see, the different parts of this monument, which is quite impressive in the way it was built up during the communist time. And after 1989 was the place where a certain past was emerging all the time. There was not only a war, but also a kind of conversation over the past and the history. And it was really challenging not only the civil society organizations in trying to entangle Bulgaria from the past of Russian colonialism in the country, but also the scholars, especially historians, to come to terms with Bulgaria, a country that has cooperated with Russia, and Bulgaria after 1989. So I think that I really like the definition of this monument as a kind of ambivalent socialist heritage, because dismantling this monument was not only a matter of dismantling an image and the dark shadows of Russian imperialism in Bulgaria, but it was also dismantling a part of Bulgarian history. And paradoxically, the heroes that you are seeing right now, so the main monument, which was this kind of Soviet soldier defending the Bulgarian family in the A photo, or the Bulgarian and the Soviet or the Russian soldiers meeting up after the liberation of the country in the photo letter B, or also the communist revolution that took place in Moscow and then in Sofia during the Second World War and the communist takeover before in 1944. Let's say it was a kind of conversation that all the time was jeopardizing the political debate in Bulgaria, and also bringing many scholars in confrontation, while at the same time the public debate and the public sphere was not really engaged with this kind of debate, discussion, let's say. This is not only, I have to say very quickly, the only monument that is very controversial for Bulgaria. As you can see here, you have on the left the image of Alyosha, who is another Soviet soldier in the city of Plovdiv, looking above the city in a very patronizing way to a certain extent. And then on the right, you have this UFO-like monument, which is right now being rebuilt and renovated. It's very famous because squarely in the center, geographically speaking, of the country, it is also, it takes the name of Budroja, and it's been right now renovated, and many have been asked to what is going to be after the renovation, what kind of rhetoric is going to trigger in the country, and how Bulgaria is going to present this very controversial heritage from the communist time in a time where the certain legacy from the communist past and history are still debated and at stake within Bulgaria and even beyond. As I can say, this is another photo of other really controversial statues. So this, on the right side, you have the statue of the Russian Tsar facing the parliament, the Bulgarian parliament, and behind it you have Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, which is once again dedicated to Alexander Nevsky, and as another Russian figure in history. So therefore, somehow Sofia is still trapped in its most significant and important places of memory in the Russian or the communist past. And let's say that the scholars have not yet, in my opinion, come to terms with how to frame this past and how to come to terms with it, and what kind of rhetoric can emerge in a time of contestation, in a time of war. Going back to the monument, in the same way Arban pointed out, art could be an extremely important role to reshape the public space and the spaces of memory. This is the monument I have been talking about right now, and since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014, there have been many counter-hegemonic initiatives to try to replace, to fill the gap of contestation with a more radical and critical approach to the status. You can see how, for instance, the LGBT community has used the space to organize the Pride Month every year. Also on the right side, and some of the sculptures have been sprayed in pink. And I think this is Czech language. I'm not familiar with it, but I think it's saying that the Bulgarians are saying sorry, and I think it was for the Bulgarian engagement during the Prague occupation by the Soviet soldiers during the communist time. And also other kind of actions have been taking place. Is the same sculptures being repainted, with the colors of American heroes, like according to our times, like trying to update the history of Bulgaria in a more critical way. And on the right side, you have the colors of the Polish and the Ukrainian flag in order to once again point out how a Soviet monument or a monument dedicated to the Soviet era can also be used as a space to counter memories. And here, in particular, the Polish and the Ukrainian colors flags have been used in order to point out the Russian, let's say, interfering in the Polish politics and in Ukraine, in particular, with the cases of Katyn. And of course, the Russian occupation of Crimea and the part of the so-called Donbass in 2014. In 2022, let's say that the monument was again put under the critical eyes of many scholars and activists, and for sure it became a new place of contestation in the Bulgarian political landscape. And particularly interesting, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of Veselin Alexiev, who with me has been conducted this study, was the position of the nationalist Bulgarians. Here you can see the photo of some Bulgarian nationalists around the motto of "We want a Bulgarian monument," criticizing the fact that the monument was not Bulgarian enough, or it was depicting the slave image of Bulgaria under the boots of Russia. And on the right side, you have the message of one of the leaders of the far-right movement and political party in Bulgaria, Възраждане, Revival, translated in English, who was actually against the demolition of the monument. Very interesting. And he was justifying that monument not through the lens of the Soviet past or the communists, because of course he despised the communist legacies and whatever is related with communism and the socialist past, but because of the close connection and the friendships that Bulgaria and Russia have in history. Just to also, as a reminder, the leader of this political party, Konstantin Konstantinov, was considered a persona non grata in Ukraine after the invasion of 2022, because there were kind of very clear ties between this monument, this political movement, with the Russian interference inside the country. Then December 2023 happened, and the demolition started. You see here some photos of this institutional decommemorization, which didn't happen through the demands of people, even though many were criticizing the monument, but it happened because of a very old decision that the Sofia municipality had taken in 1993. So after Russia invaded Ukraine, some kind of debates in the country regarding the monument and what to do with this monument, since now it's clear that Russia is again invading and behaving the same way he has done historically. We need to demolish this monument. So here you see some pieces. So together with Vasily and Alexiev, we started to interview some young architects and the so-called generation of post-memory. For those people who are interested in memory studies, the definition sounds extremely familiar. This is a concept used by Marin Hirsch in the Holocaust studies, actually, but we tried to look at this generation of post-memory. Therefore, the people who were born after 1989 had to deal with the urban landscape and the heritage in Bulgaria, and to ask them what was their feeling and reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and regarding especially the monument to the Soviet, dedicated to the Soviet army. So we had a number of 12 young architects who wanted to participate in our interviews, and we did it in two times. So it was like a 2-interview round. The first one was done before December 2023, so before this institutional decommemorization and the dismantling of the monument, and the second one was done right after the demolition of the monument. And the answers were extremely interesting to us. Very quickly, at the very beginning, the interviews were taking place in a time where Russia had already started the full-scale aggression against Ukraine. The monument was debated inside the country, and there was not really criticism or a critical overview of these 12 young architects who self-defined as very progressive with a very critical approaches to heritage. They were describing the monument, telling us how important it was in the history of Bulgarian heart, that many Bulgarians participated in the erection of this building during the communist time, and that they wanted to think carefully about the dismantlement of this monument, and that perhaps it should be done in a way to make it more Bulgarian, so more under the shadows of national colors or national branding, let's say. After the demolition, so after December 2023, the same 12 architects were interviewed, and their insights were quite interesting, and they started to end up in kind of contradiction with what they have said, because they really criticized the dismantling or the way it was dismantled, the monument. Here you can see 3 photos, and some in the way the interviewees were criticizing how the monument was chopped away from the pedestal and how it was brought down, and how basically the people who were dismantling, they were not respecting the cultural heritage ways or mechanism of dismantling such a kind of monument, and how they were really frustrated and with a sense of disgust towards the way Bulgarian institutions were treating this kind of monument. So on the one hand, they were criticizing the monument, of course, because it was casting a dark shadow on the Bulgarian history, and it was a kind of domination of Soviet heritage over Sofia and the Bulgarian national identity. On the other hand, they were not really happy and even ashamed of how the local authorities were dismantling this monument. So their kind of contradiction, let's say, shows how, first of all, Bulgaria, in a time of war, not only with Ukraine, but also in terms of the current war in Gaza, it doesn't really have a position of many things. This is for sure a problem for the knowledge production in the country, or also the engagement of scholars in these critical debates. But on the other hand, also they have kind of very strong anti-communist hysteria, which is basically meaning that it's impossible for a scholar or for an academic or even for a young architect that has nothing to do with communism or with the communist legacy and heritage to try to not to legitimize or to try to think otherwise about communism, but to have a position where he's going to have an opinion or even a project, perhaps a project for a place of memory where the communist past is going to be reused for any kind of purposes. In our opinion, I think this is a very strong contradiction in history that even Maria Todorova described in terms of Bulgaria, but also for the Balkans. We had, on the one hand, this positivist historiography that has to give the country, the post-socialist country, a kind of telos, like a kind of end in a time of transition towards a full-fledged democracy. On the other hand, you have a postmodern historiography, which is very criticized, and many scholars may agree, but not fully. To conclude, this is the photo of taken by a drone of the monument, which was dismantled, and basically now in the outskirts of the city, nobody knows not only what is the future, let's say, if these statues are going to be used even in the Museum of Socialist History in Sofia, or they are going to be completely abandoned, and what is the future of that monument? If the monument is going to be reused in a certain way, is going to host other art exhibition or events, or basically it's going to be just a place where nobody is going to take care of the memory and let's say the potential reverberation that this place of memory may trigger among the Bulgarian political landscape and the political and the wider public in a time of contestation, war, and polarization. So I stop here. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm willing to answer you all possible questions during the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much, Francesco, and thank you all of the panelists. So now we've got like around 20 minutes remaining for questions and comments. So I open the floor. Please raise your hand or write your question or comment in this Q&A chat. Do we have any comments, please? If no, so let's think a bit, and maybe I will start with some of my questions to our guests. If I may, Arvan, to you, because I really like this photo of the Kosovo television and the slogan about the freedom has a name and the connection to the UÇK. As we know, of course, last almost, I don't know, from 2008, so from the independence of Kosovo, we can say that, in fact, ex-UÇK members had a power, formed different governments in Kosovo, and of course, they were able to create this kind of memory of the 90s, and of course somehow strengthening the narrative of the as you said, warlords from the 90s. But since 2020 we've got at least new two different governments chaired by the by the man Albin Kurti, who was at the time activist as a student and a young leader. My question is whether he or his political party try since 2020 somehow also challenge this previous official narrative somehow.
Thank you, Agata. Well, ever since Albin Kurti's government came to power, as we know, this is the second time that he is the prime minister. He was briefly during the time of the pandemics, and then again in these last 3-4 years. I think his government challenged this very predominant narrative of the strong man and the warlords in different ways. One way is by recognizing victims of sexual abuse and sexual violence during the war in Kosovo by pushing through the parliament with a majority that his political party and his allies had a law which would give some kind of financial support to these victims of sexual violence, which was a taboo topic under the rule of the warlords, because for the warlords and these political elites that came out of these warlords, the predominant narrative was that there are only strong men and war heroes and soldiers. That is one thing. The other thing is that with Kurti, there is more public recognition, but not only with Kurti, but also with the president, I have to say here, public recognition of civil victims and the missing persons. There is just recently, I think the most important work on the civil victims came out in Kosovo in 3 languages, that is in Albanian, Serbian, and English, by Shkelzen, who was a political advisor of Kurti during his first mandate. So I would say there is a clear moving forward. But if you would ask me as a researcher, as a former activist in the civil society many years ago, I would say that there is still much to do to challenge these predominant narratives. What I also would like to emphasize here is that when it comes to the 90s, there is now a lot of good work coming up. There was a very good exhibition which has been shown in October in Berlin and also a year ago in Vienna. It's about the non-violent movement in Kosovo. And Albin Kurti visited this exhibition even in Berlin when he was there on a state visit. So I think there is a moving forward to a more nuanced and a more complex picture when it comes to what do we decide to memorize. Thank you.
Agata, you're muted.
Yeah.
You have to unmute yourself.
Guys, sorry. I just to follow up this only short question to Arben, because the decision was already made about the establishing the Institute for War Crimes committed in the 90s in Kosovo. And it will be the public institution, the first of such kind. But do you believe that this kind of institution really has a chance to somehow break the silence of this missing person and, of course, victims from the 90s?
That's very difficult to answer. I think that really depends on the international facilitators, if they still have any leverage on the Western Balkans in the way that they have dealt in the past, not only with the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, but also with the whole European integration process and with the reconciliation process in the Western Balkans. I think for me personally, it would be rather important that we discuss the publications that we have in our hands now, that we discuss it not only in small circles in civil society and in academia, especially abroad, where this is being discussed and treated broadly, but that we discuss it in the Western Balkans itself. And if I may just quote the Serbian historian Dubravka Stojanovic here, she just recently said in Berlin in an event on the 5th of December that we as historians, we have failed in the Western Balkans to kind of give the right impulses to educate the younger generations. I think on the one hand, this is a political decision if we can move forward on the topic of missing persons. And there I see a complete full stop on this issue. But on the other hand, what I would like to focus on, because most of us are academics and education institutions, is that we debate this with young generations, with our societies. And this is something that we can do. And I think the most recent publication by is an attempt to communicate with one another, to read and to review, why not, and to debate it at length. Thanks, Agatha.
Thank you so much, Edwin. So do we have maybe right now some questions, comments? Or maybe our guests have some comments or questions to each other?
Agatha, I was actually about to ask Arban about what you asked, so okay. I'm not going to repeat your question.
I'm so sorry, Francesca. So maybe another two questions. Maybe I will formulate it right now. Also, first one will be to Professor Bubako, and the second one will be to Francesco, if I may. So, Monica, could you tell us share with us your opinion about this? You mentioned this marginalization and silencing the Palestinian experience we can observe, but do you believe that in fact it has been changing? I mean, at the beginning of the war, the discussion, the narrative about the situation in Palestine, especially in Europe, was in fact heard, and it was an ongoing discussion at the time. But since the war is ongoing and the time is passing, in fact, this, if I may say, the silencing is more vivid. And if so, do you believe? What is your opinion about it? If it's a case, do you know why? And the second question to Francesco, and you have a minute to think about it. Francesco, you mentioned this different visible manifestation of this ideological polarization, and in fact, it was happening during several different parliamentary elections in Bulgaria, and whether I'm just wondering whether this kind of manifestation and challenging this current narrative also was a case during this several different election campaign, whether this somehow this topic was important or crucial for the political elite somehow. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Agatha, for your question. I'm not sure if I fully got it because connection was like disrupted for a while. You asked, I don't know if you can hear me now.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. You asked me about the changes that happened over the course of the last year, yeah, in terms of attitude towards Palestinian experience. That's what you asked, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that in this discursive space that I mentioned, things are slowly changing, and obviously people are confronted with documents and reports on the situation in Gaza, not only with I don't know, social media messages and images. Yeah, so we've got like important reports like, I don't know, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc., etc. So people are forced to confront this kind of documents and think about their interpretation of the conflict. But obviously you can see that general attitude in public sphere in Poland, well, it's somehow related with history and the geopolitical relations and this domination of pro-Israeli perspective, you know, which is related obviously to politics. You know, the fact that after 1989, Poland redirected towards the West, and this policy of solidarity with the Palestinian side was shifted to the policy of alliance with the West and Israeli side in the conflict. So that's obviously one context. And another element is this particular memory war that I mentioned, this debate about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, which made people really be committed to Israel as, you know, somehow linked to the history of anti-Semitism, and also to the fact that many Polish Jews participated in constructing Israeli state, etc., etc. So, like, general starting point has been pro-Israeli perspective. It was gradually this discussion has been changing as new information appeared. In my perception, also the prominence, the presence of well-established Islamophobic or Arabophobic sentiments also contribute to the fact that it is so difficult to articulate pro-Palestinian position, or to even just expose the experiences of Palestinians, and not only talk about this official Israeli interpretation of the war as a defensive war. But yes, things are happening, and also like, you can see the number of articles recently. There has been a lot of debate around one petition formulated as an expression of solidarity with Palestinians. Many prominent authors signed the petition, so it provoked a very strong reaction. Yeah, so I can see that in the context of this kind of documents, people react. There are reactions in social media, but also in press, in like more established media, and you can see that people like struggle with their commitments. Yeah, they try to find a formula to be devoted to the struggle against anti-Semitism and somehow be able to encompass this Palestinian experience. And I see that this is like still difficult, and my reading of the reasons for that is this weakness of post-colonial, anti-colonial sensibilities. It is so difficult, like, to include the Palestinian perspective if the whole perception is so Eurocentric. We are so focused on our memory, on our history, and those non-European others are outside of our universe. So I perceive it as an important factor. But yes, things has been changing, and I'm really curious in what direction it will go.
Thank you so much. Francesco, are we ready?
Yes, and thank you for this question, which is quite easy, but at the same time complicated. I know it sounds like a paradox, but I will try to untie this paradox and to explain it. From the 2022 until the October 7 event and then afterwards, Bulgaria has been in a huge political crisis, which has led the country to many national elections and also at the local level. And paradoxically, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza haven't been able to change the political debates in the country. Somehow they have been completely put aside from the political discussion, which is very nationally oriented. It's about the domestic issues, the fact that Bulgaria is very unstable from an institutional point of view. But at the same time, if we take in consideration the case of the Russians' war against Ukraine, the monument in Sofia was demolished, and it was a kind of decision taken after a wave of protest on the side of dismantling the monument and on the side of not dismantling the monument and take it and keep it as such, because this is our friendship with Russia, and this is our history. So this is the first dilemma. The only exception is once again the far right, and this political party I was presenting very briefly, Transnational, which is actually the third political party in terms of electoral turnouts. I mean, they have certain consensus among the country, and this is very telling, because the position of that political party might be not only in defense of the monument, which was demolished, but it has always expressed very pro-Russian position and anti-Western and anti-NATO voices within the country. So this is very complicated to understand why the Bulgarian nationalists do not manage to have their own position in a domestic debate, which is something that I can also relate with other far-right movements across Europe. But the problem in Bulgaria is that basically much of the history of Bulgaria, contemporary history of Bulgaria, is somehow related with the Russian past and with Russia itself, from the Balkan wars to the Soviet time, to the communist time, and so on and so forth. And it's still the legacy which is bothering most historians inside the country. And this gives us also another interesting perspective on the war in Gaza, which has been not debated at all in Bulgaria. And this is also interesting for another political party in Bulgaria, which is the Movement for Rights and Freedoms, which is de facto the Turkish and Muslim political party, created after the collapse of communism, not being able to identify along religious or ethnic lines because of the Bulgarian constitution, but is de facto the political party which is gaining consensus among the Turkish minority and the Muslim minority in the country, which is historically in Bulgaria. And they have been completely silent on the war in Gaza. Of course, here you have not only the burden of, as perhaps in Poland, you see to formulate pro-Palestinian positions, but also the burden of national historiography, which has been all the time formulating the idea that Bulgaria was a good country in a time of war, which is, of course, very debatable from a historical point of view. The Holocaust studies in Bulgaria are becoming very interesting for many international scholars rather than domestic scholars, because the latter are in trouble, let's say, or very they found themselves in troubles to formulate, to disentangle the history of the country where and take responsibility from a historical point of view when it comes to the Holocaust, for instance, and to justify some kind of pro-Palestinian position and for the situation in Gaza. And on the other hand, you have these international scholars, Bulgarians as well, who are trying to have a critical insight, which is not even understood by people in Bulgaria, inside the country, and most of the time is considered to be a kind of international and foreign ideology, which is going to damage Bulgaria in the long run. So you have constantly, in the case of Ukraine, the case of Gaza or the Middle East war, a kind of cognitive dissonance from a historical point of view.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Since we are running out of time, any quick comment maybe? Or question? If no, so this is the end of our today's seminar. Thank you so much once again for being with us today, and particularly to our three speakers for your very interesting presentation. I would like to add that, of course, our today seminar is recorded and will be available on the MSA YouTube channel very soon. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see each other on the other dMSA event. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.